Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anatomy of an Adaptation. This is a podcast that aims to compare and contrast classic novels with their cinematic adaptations. I'm your host, Nicolo Grasso, and I'm joined today by my good friend, Hilary White. How are you doing, Hilary? It's been a while. Have you read anything good recently?
Oh, that's a very good question. Right now,
Out of
I'm
left
reading
field.
out of left field on a podcast about books. What are you reading lately? I'm reading aside from the Virgin Suicides, I'm reading a biography of the actress Myrna Loy, which is quite huge,
Oh.
and it's been very enjoyable. I thought that's going to be some light reading that I might need because most of the stuff I do read is on the heavier side, and I've been enjoying it quite a bit. A lot of insight, a lot of behind the scenes stories and about film at the time. So I'm enjoying that quite a bit.
Yeah, it's always good, I think, to have lighter reading on the side. Something
Hmm.
that just doesn't take too much mental capacity. Even right now, I'm reading some books for the podcast, some like other novels that are a bit heavier thematically in terms of content as well and writing style. So I find film books to be quite comforting in a way. It's just
Yes.
like it feels like family. It's like I know these people. I know they're I can recognize things. It's like chill. I did read one, not an endorsement in any way because I didn't like it. It was like an unofficial John Wick oral history book,
Oh,
which was just a collection of snippets of interviews that also spent like half of the book just talking generally about the history of action cinema, which is cool, I guess, but it's not what the book was supposed to be about. And funnily enough, it came out. I read it. It was. I think it's like from 2021 or something. And just recently, we had an actual proper official making of documentary about the John Wick films, which is way better than this book, sadly. But yeah, it was relaxing though, especially like going from that to the Lisbon sisters and everything happening in these very very sad suburbs. Um,
yeah. Well, it's a shame because I mean, it sounds like the book was set up like an oral history and oral biography where it's just a bunch of voices, and I love that format. So to botch that is just a huge disappointment and
it's filler, complete filler, beginning to
sad.
end. Just
But the documentary, I did see the trailer for that. It does look very promising, and if you liked it, I'll definitely keep an eye out for it for when it's available in my neck of the woods.
it's worth a watch. Any documentary that actually shows people getting very upset making a movie, arguing, all of the nasty things that no one usually talks about in documentaries. They're always very clean. It's the challenge of filmmaking. It's all very romanticized, and it always makes me think of the good Guillermo del Toro, who says, "I think I have on average like one good day on a set per shoot."
Oh
It's like every
man.
other day is miserable. Like things are going wrong. It just
Hmm.
sucks. You have to get the shots. You're over budget, over time. Everyone's tired. It's cold or it's too warm. It's like it's not fun making a movie. Maybe you have one good day where you're actually enjoying it. Otherwise, sucks. Which is
Yeah.
a honest way of actually going about it.
Isn't there? I'm trying to remember. There is a director. I'm trying to remember which one it was. It was one of like the most lauded, like one of the greats. He said that your job is basically it's solving problems. Like that's he put it a lot better than I did, but it's just basically like problem solving. Every single day, it's going to be a disaster, and you're putting out fires. That's it. And that's not what I think you're taught in film school. That's definitely not the impression you get through watching behind the scenes documentaries about your favorite movies. You just think like they
Mm.
made it, how interesting, but it actually was.
Everything was intentional. Everything came together so well every step of the way, you know? Um, yeah, no, no, those are fun. Those are fun. But no, I'm very, very happy to have you on board. Again, we are full on in the summer period now by the time this episode releases. So it made sense to talk about something that to me feels like summer whenever I think about this book, whenever I think about this movie. It just screams warmth and coziness with a very, very, very strong sense of melancholy, sadness, and ennui. Of course, today we're talking about the 1993 book by Jeffrey Eugenides, The Virgin Suicides, and the 1999 Sofia Coppola adaptation.
you doing here, honey? You're not even old enough to know how bad life gets.
Obviously, Doctor. You've never been a 13-year-old girl.
Hillary, I know you have a very long history with the Virgin Suicides. Would you like to, introduce the book primarily, but also just how you discovered this story for the first time?
Well, they're definitely connected, and of course, this is going to apply to my age. But I found out about the Virgin Suicides through a piece in a magazine about the making of the film, and there was a picture of I think it was Kirsten Dunst and Sofia Coppola sitting together somewhere on location, and I thought, what a title for a movie! What is this? And it mentioned the book, of course, and so I'm not entirely sure how it happened. I think it was, like, the early days of, like, online shopping, but I think I probably bought, a paperback of the book, and
Uh-huh.
it was shipped to me, and, I read it, and I thought, "Holy shit," and then I think I read it again. I don't know how many times I read it, and I just thought, "Wow, this is one hell of a book," and the way I feel about it is very similar to the way you feel about it. It's very melancholic, and there's this overwhelming sense of, like, longing and loss and sadness and just, also, like, just confusion and things just not making sense no matter how much, you try to put things together, and, so the book quickly became one of my favorites, and, I've lost track of how many times I've read it, over the years, and then, I went and saw the film, and I think I'm gonna save my thoughts about that for later on when we transition over to, uh, how the 2 compare and all of that jazz. But, the book has been very important to me. What's been crazy about the book, and I'm interested about your thoughts on this, is that this came out in 1993. It's strange to think, like, it was only 6 years later that it got adapted into a film.
Yeah.
And then there's all this time between the book coming out and all this time since the film has come out, and where it has found a home on the internet, the kind of people who champion this book or integrate it into their aesthetic, um, or what it's come to mean has morphed over the years. And but for me, it's very much a book, not necessarily like an identity thing, like, "Oh, like, these girls are me," or I identify with the boys or anything like that. It was just an incredibly sad story, and I empathized with what happened, how tragic it was, and, I guess it's, like, been just a long, I don't wanna say obsession with it, but just returning back to it the same way that the narrators return to the story.
I can imagine. I mean, especially because it's such a richly layered story where you almost, I don't know, does it feel, before I go into my thoughts, I'm very curious. Does it feel like something that each time you read it, you not necessarily see yourself in some of the characters, but do you change like point of view perspectives because there's so many different moving pieces in here in the story surrounding the Lisbon sisters that I don't know, did that happen with you, maybe like rereading it this time around? Maybe it's more like
Ye
the parents perspective or the parts with the priest, things like that.
uh that is a very good question. I mean, as far as the girls, I feel the same. Very much Cecilia, the first one. I just thought
Mm,
like, yeah, if someone as far as like the one that people had been like, she's probably like that one, it probably would be be her because she just can't, there's something very strange and they just can't figure her out.
mhm.
And not to say that in personality or interests or um anything like that that we were similar, but just as far as, being a kid that people can't quite figure you out, like, "I don't know what this is." I was definitely that kid. Um, I'd say not this time, but I did read it once before a few years back, and I did read a lot more about I think, like, the broader picture as far as, like, this being, an affluent, Michigan suburb mostly
Mhm.
white, and of course, like references to, there's race riots in the background, there's the decline of the auto industry, there's the grave digger strike, all these different economic things kind of teeming at the edges of this very, this bubble of, the supposed American dream that's about to pop. That became a lot more apparent to me as I got older. And of course, I think also, the male gaze and all of that has been very um, put under a microscope and
Mhm.
seen differently as well. But I think that the way that it's handled in this book doesn't bother me so much. I know that that's might not be a popular thing to say right now, but like teenage boys look at girls and they feel sexual feelings, they feel aroused. They All of that's like, why would that not be in this book? That's how teenage boys feel when they have a crush on someone, the same way that girls feel a certain way when they crush on a girl or a boy that they're interested in. So um it actually I'm we both watched the behind the scenes documentary. I forgot this bit of information. They do have some interviews with Jeffrey Eugenides, and he says, when he released the book, he was accused of misogyny. And I
Yeah.
had forgotten about that. And I just thought, like, how is that possible? Because he wrote a book where I feel incredibly strongly for these girls, not even knowing them. I just feel awful for them. I feel a lot of empathy for them. Um, and I guess I just didn't feel the same way, but I think abstractly it could be seen that way.
Yeah, I have thoughts about the whole misogyny angle. I can save them for later, but no,
Of course.
I definitely have many things to say actually that kind of play into just how we talk about, like, the collective we talk about um challenging art, especially art that tries to put a mirror towards the readers or the viewers or whoever the audience spectators. It is kind of funny that this is the second time we're back on the podcast in this new iteration of the show. And the first time around, we talked with the good Carson, who was supposed to be here with us. So Carson, hi, if you're listening to this,
Yes,
we
we
miss
miss
you.
you.
We miss you, man. We did talk about Into the Wild, and it's just funny because we're going with all of those quintessential American stories that I find it so fascinating as like a 27, almost 28 years old Italian reading about things so specific like the suburbs, and post-war America. I don't know. It's just kind of funny because it always feels so distant to me, but in a way it makes it interesting to connect with certain elements on a deeper level. Just universally, some things are just inevitable, like you were mentioning now. Just like, you're a teenager, the hormones and the blossoming of the attractions and those things are inevitable for all genders, all sexes. um but I have to say, I didn't know what to expect from the Virgin Suicides. Everything I'd heard leading up to my first read was almost exclusively about the film, a film that I'd already seen a few years ago. So I knew the story, I remembered what happened in it. But I have to say, there's something, and I loved listening to Eugenides talk about just the writing process of it, where he had literally nothing to lose in a way while writing it. It's his first novel. Halfway through writing it, he lost his job, and he was just like, "Well, I guess this is what I'm doing now, just writing this book, and hopefully it works out." And he manages to make something very, very compelling. He wanted to prove himself in a way, and right from the opening, he doesn't treat this as a mystery. He doesn't treat this as um I would say like a drama, in the sense of, it doesn't treat it as a melodrama, rather. It treats it as a tragedy, as an unavoidable tragedy, one that probably could not have been avoided in any way if people knew more about these Lisbon sisters. Right from the opening, the book just opens, and it's this collective consciousness just remembering this girl, this one year in their life where first they lost their youngest sister, and then collectively they all decided to pass away a year later. And it's a dark book. it's a dense book, which I was not expecting. It's something you've already touched on actually. Um, is that there is so much about just the state of America in the 70s, right? Like this is supposed to be like early 70s, correct?
I think so. Yeah,
Because it's like
I definitely the
20-ish
70s vibe.
years. Yeah, it's like 20-ish years before
93.
93. So
Yeah.
like Vietnam War is still happening. Everything that you mentioned, like this economic dream is like, oh, the suburbs and the Midwest. Eugenides himself talked about just the connection to his own youth, because he was growing up in Detroit and he saw that city kind of start to die in a way.
Yeah.
And so with this slow approach of the minds of the Lisbon sisters, there's also this kind of collapse of the perfect, beautiful, idyllic American society. Just like everyone's happy, white picket fences, the suburbs. It's everyone's friends with each other. We don't like black people, but that's okay. That unites us. It's just one of those
They're
things
only
like,
our
oh,
mates. Yeah, that sort of
oh.
thing. It's not stated outright, but it's just in the details. Like the only black people they interact with are people who work for them or they see them at a
Yeah.
bus stop. So, but the fact that he put that in there, I think that's intentional. It's not like,
Yeah.
it's. I guess it's how teenage boys would see it at the time, but also we're seeing it through the lens of them in their 40s or no, actually, some would be their 40s. It'd be like their mid 30s, I suppose.
Yeah, they will be adults. And yeah, there's so much. That's something that I loved about this book, is that I don't know, the same premise in anyone else's hands would have probably been more traditional, in the sense of just, here's what's happening day to day, blah 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 blah. They say this, they do that, this happens and this happens. Oh my god, they're dead. That's the end. This constant element that which feels almost like it's a true story, with so many little details
Oh, yeah.
sprinkled here and there. It's never heavy. It's never. I would say it's actually a very breezy read. It's a very short book as well, which I appreciated. I've had some long books to read
Yes.
for other episodes. I was like, yes, it's like a 3 hour read or so. It's like, I love it. I love it. More books like this, please. But there are so many details. Some of which will be picked up in the movie, of course, as well. But just you know how people react, how people, just like during a time of grieving, how someone might not feel good enough to even finish a sandwich. There's that famous half-eaten just sad sandwich sitting on the on the
On the
on
stairs.
the stairs when the priest goes to visit the grieving mother. Like, there's so many details like that sprinkled throughout that truly makes this feel true to life, right? Just this whole household also, and the Lisbon sisters. How do you feel about these characters? The characters that almost blend, except for two, I would say. They almost kind of blend one with the other. It's not like they have this by design, I would say, like this distinct um looks, or I think there's barely even any description of like each one of them, correct? But just
Of the
generally, how do you
girls or
yeah, yeah, of the girls, how do you feel about it, just generally, about
um
them?
the thing is I'm able to tell the girls apart because I think I've read the book enough.
Hmm.
The boys, it's actually harder. There was one, I have two copies of the book and there is one in the other room right now. And I was paging through, and in the back of the book there was a slip of paper, and at one point
Oh.
during one of my reads I started writing down all the boys' names and trying to figure out who was where at what time, because I think with the boys it's actually way more of a blend. 'Cause, like, sometimes you get different details and stuff like that that contradict each other, that it's obvious that like maybe different like witnesses disagreed about something, or there's
Hmm.
some details that seem to be more sexually motivated and other ones that seem to be a little bit more pulled back and more pragmatic about what's happening, because it's viewpoints of like at least like 20 different boys. I mean, it's
It's a lot of
absolutely
names.
crazy. Yeah. There's some that come up again and again. Like, it's
Hmm.
pretty clear that Chase Buell lives across the street because that comes up over and over again.
Yeah.
Or Joe Hill Conley, um, just Parky Denton, Paul Baldino. all of that, gets thrown into the mix. With the girls, yeah, you're able to kind of tell them apart. And I think the film actually does help give people who read the book more of a visual.
Hmm.
And the film, I will say, is cast very well. Just what the girls are into, what their interests are, I think is probably what designates their personalities the most. But it gives at least a reader like me enough insight to kind of know, like, maybe a little bit more about their personalities because of the way that they behave, what they're dealing with, and then it's almost like detritus that's kind of left behind. And I think I will say this book has probably the most compelling opening paragraph I've ever read in any book. Because if you read the first paragraph of the Virgin Suicides and you think, yeah, you know what? I just don't care about what happened. And you close the book. I just don't see how that's possible because it's just absolutely crazy. Immediately starts just like they're all dead. And you want to know why. And by the end of the book, of course, you don't ever really know why. Um,
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sorry. That was a long-winded answer to your question. But basically, yeah, I can't tell the girls apart. But actually, the more I read this, the more I'm just like, how many boys are there? Like even this time, I thought I'm gonna have to actually sit down at some point and read this book again, and maybe put together my own personal wiki about this book because there's a lot
Oh,
of
okay.
things going on in there.
That would be interesting. That would be interesting. That's kind of like connecting all the names and keeping track of it, which I like that. Again, it's something that Eugenides does by design. It does not expect. It's a problem I have sometimes with long books, especially those epic sweeping novels that have 50 characters that you have to keep track of. They can tend to blur just the names, so I find it more easy to just connect to who's where, and that's how I remember who's who.
Yes.
I'm just terrible with names in general when it comes to fiction. Um, and I like that in here having this almost it's it's almost like a poetic retelling of a series of interviews in a way that
Yeah.
doesn't do the book justice.
Or like a reportage, and especially like near the end where it says there's been so much written about the girls by
Yes.
other sources, and it's almost like explodes the narrative outward, where it's like, imagine if this was a news story. Like for example, if you think about something tragic that happened with teenagers like Columbine,
Hmm.
that's so far as like an American story where it's like a lot of people died, and there's tons of news stories, documentaries, there's interviews, there's podcasts about all this sort of stuff. But then it ends up like there's this tiny little narrative, and it's like we were the people in the neighborhood. This is what we saw happen. That's actually very compelling because it hints at the fact that although this is fiction, it starts to feel like nonfiction by the end, where it's referencing all the stuff that actually doesn't exist, and that's amazing.
That part hit very close to home because that's something I've experienced and seen many times, especially as a church going boy in my it's pretty much my entire life until I was 21. I want to say, um, there was just so much gossip that I would hear about the neighborhood, which is a classic. I think anyone anywhere has experienced this in one way or another. And it's something that I always found very intriguing that you go to these places where you hear these people just like whispering, "Oh, did you hear? Did you see that happened? Oh, yes, I heard, but did you know? Like I was talking to the cousin, to the mother, to the sister, to the thing." And it's always as far removed from reality as possible. Because in a way, these people don't really care that much about who they're talking about. They're just projecting their own desires, their own insecurities, their own fears, their own doubts. And that's something that I really liked about the book, the way Eugenides just paints this portrait of the suburbs and these people who are not really like it's something that in an idealized version of the story you would get, the coming together narrative, at a time of crisis they show up for this family and they show their support. It's like there's none of that. There's outside of like some pitying. It's like, oh, that sucks, yeah, losing a kid that's young. Whoosh, that's not good. Yeah, I never want that to happen to me. Outside of that, there's nothing more than that. They don't want to share the grief of the family. They don't want to support them, and they also don't want to be there to actually understand what the sisters are going through. Which is so interesting with the whole like they are a mystery angle. Like you get to the end and you don't really know what happened, why they did what they did. But also you kind of do.
You could, yeah,
Right.
there's enough there that you could maybe put together something, but there are these missing pieces, like specifically the one person they did tell their problems to was like it was like a school counselor who ended up being a fraud and fled. She has all this information, and that's the one of the few people they aren't able to track down and interview. Another detail is that shortly after their deaths, someone sees Mrs. Lisbon going out into the backyard with a huge pile of manuscript papers, and she burns them. And I thought, there's probably everything in there, and she burned it. Things about the luggage, the because I think someone said they even saw Cecilia holding a briefcase before she killed herself.
Hmm.
But they said it might have been his bifocals or the glasses he was wearing, like it might have been a trick of the light or something. There's all these details where there's suggestions of answers being there, but they've actually been wiped away or they're not accessible. And it's happening in a neighborhood specifically, which I identify with on another level, where it's a culture or a group of people who aren't equipped to deal with this kind of thing because they want
Hmm.
everything to be okay. And it's interesting, you brought up religion. There is religion in this somewhat. It's not as pervasive. Like the whole neighborhood, they're not all like Presbyterian or Catholic, or they where they go together, and that's what's preventing, communication from happening. It's just that the Lisbon family is religious, but um, in the environment where I was raised, it was very much like this is how things go and this is how everything works. And then if anything happens that's kind of outside of their wheelhouse or the rules or how things are supposed to go, they just don't know how to deal with it. So the way they deal with it is like burying it or
Hmm.
ignoring it completely. And that leads to very similar things: suicide, addiction, um, widespread, like ongoing abuse, corruption, all sorts of stuff like that that kind of is happening in the background, and people gossip about it, but that's all they do about it. They don't intervene. And I think that actually this time, I think as an adult reading this, one of the things I struggle with is what could have been done. And I keep thinking about that, like if
Hmm.
this was happening in my neighborhood, what would I feel like I could do? And that's actually a very hard question to answer. What do you do? But obviously these people didn't do anything, which is the worst.
Yeah. I the closer we that's something else that I found interesting. He's listening to interviews with the writer, is that he said that originally it was actually much longer. I don't know if it was like a first draft or when he was just writing the book. It was like, let's just focus on everyone in this in this neighborhood, in this town, and all the different perspectives. But he always ended up gravitating towards the teenagers, the teenage boys more specifically. um, and I'm glad that he stuck with them because there is a level of, on one side, purity, on another, um immaturity. That's a word, right?
Mhm.
They're all very mature. They're not, um they're it's not the perspective of like a 60-year-old lady who lives down the street, so it makes it makes it more sad in a way, because I think otherwise it would be very frustrating, but frustrating in a way that is relatable, I would say, as well, because it's so, that's something that I also really appreciated here, is that the book doesn't end with them killing themselves. There's a good part of it is just like what's happened afterwards, how people reacted, the house being closed down and everything, being sold, sorry. And it's one of those things where it's always in hindsight, everything always makes every, oh yep, yeah,
It was
those
just
things
meant
are,
to happen,
that's just meant
yeah.
to happen. Of course, of course, of course, we're gonna kill themselves, right? which is ridiculous. But it's always hindsight is 2020, and it's always easy to sit on top of your completely detached, emotionally detached perspective to judge other people. Um, I personally don't think there's. I think that people get the closest to actually connecting to them are the boys, and even then, it's a very very shallow connection. You have I find him to be incredibly fascinating and frustrating at the same time. The character of Trip Fontaine,
Oh boy,
this
yeah.
bad boy, bad boy is very much attracted to Lux, one of the Lisbon sisters, and their whole relationship. It's one of those things where it's happened before. Like, we probably have known people who've gone through it from one side or the other of their relationship. It just happens, where a guy sees a girl and she's just a prize. There's the attraction. It's like, she's complicated, she's not an easy prey. I need to work for it. It's just, I need to prove that I'm actually very mature, a good guy, and I'm not here with any ill intent. I'm gonna work her father the right way, play the right way, the correct way, everything just to get what I want. And the moment he gets what he wants, boom, is out. That's it. Done. Bye bye. And it's so frustrating because there is potentially an alternative reality. He was not going to be, a forever partner or anything like that. But he could have been someone that at least Lux could have opened up to, could have been more vulnerable with, and it's something that he completely destroys, with a strong tinge of regret, which I like about the whole like present day angle, which doesn't happen often in the book, but sometimes it just cuts to like the late early 90s where he goes, like, the writer of the book itself like is going to interview people, and the interviews Tree Fontaine, he interviews the mother when she's living by herself later on. And I don't know, like, that entire portion was so intriguing because it just shows how sometimes things, like choices that are made in life, make no sense, are clearly going to hurt other people, but in that specific point in time they feel like the only right thing to do, maybe out of fear, out of embarrassment. I don't know. How did you feel about Trip Fontaine? Because I can imagine it's a character you've grown to love to hate over the
No,
years. I
actually,
wonder, actually.
that's the strange thing actually with Trip Fontaine. I should hate him. I actually don't. I kind of think of him as complicit in what happens, absolutely, and
Hmm.
definitely not the romantic lead of the book or the film. And he's very much painted that way as someone who instigates. I think of him as the final blow
Hmm.
that really, sends everything into a spiral, and how the story ends up. I don't hate him very much. I think that just from the very beginning where they start talking about where he comes from. It's someone who is so selfish. I think he doesn't even fully comprehend what he's doing. And one of the big differences between how he's portrayed in the book and the film is that I think it just kind of ends in the film saying like, well, at least I tasted that love once, man, which is in the book. But in the book, he says, yeah, after I had sex with her, I was just like sick of her.
Like,
I was just sick of
instantly.
her.
It's like
He's
a
just like,
switch, right?
yeah, he doesn't talk about what she did or what happened or anything. He does say there's a detail that I think that, well, during them having sex, I think she starts crying and says like, I always mess up. I always make mistakes. So I don't know, how it progressed from there, and that maybe her crying or being vulnerable or knowing that she was going to get in trouble, it just wasn't what he was interested in. And he thought like, oh, she's being clingy or emotional, and I'm a 17-year-old boy and I don't have time for this shit. And he said he didn't care how she got home. Like there's obviously something really wrong with him. But I think in the broader picture of just everyone who's involved with this. I mean, he is younger and he caused a lot of damage, but the collective damage from everyone else is just as kind of horrible, even though there is an intent with them either. Like they don't want them to die, but they just didn't do anything, which is kind of mind-numbing when you think about it. There is one line I'll always return to in the book
Hmm.
because it was the only thing that I thought this is close to something I would have done. That Chase Buell's mother, when the note that she slips to them among the flowers after Cecilia dies, she just writes, "I don't know what you're feeling. I won't even pretend." And I thought that does seem like how I would approach the situation. And I've actually said things like that to people who've gone through similar things, losing a child, or people who have experienced a loved one who's committed suicide. It's not about coming in and saying platitudes. It's more like, I'm not going to pretend that I understand what's happening. What do you need from
Mhm.
me? And that seemed to be the only honest communication about what was going on in the entire book, which is really sad.
Yeah. Everyone else, yeah, either goes for the platitudes or doesn't do anything. Especially with the Cecilia's suicide in the beginning, there's a whole angle of trying to paint it as an accident because that's more socially acceptable. There's a whole religious angle there as well, where it's like, well, we cannot bury suicides, but she was 13. Um, like there's all those yeah, all those
Mhm.
elements that are very
Yeah, Father Moody, Dr. Horniker, these characters that come back.
mhm,
I think Moody does several times, and I thought that's because of the Catholic angle, the fact that he listed all of their deaths as suicides, and when the boys confront him about that as adults, he says the way he rationalizes it is, "We don't know what was going on in these girls' hearts," which is there's a grace in that, but it's so they killed themselves. They killed themselves. I mean, Cecilia, I could kind of see that, like people being in that realm of denial, like, oh, maybe it was an accident. Maybe she fell out of the window or something. And but what happened with the other four? No, all at the
also
same
Cecilia
time.
already recovering from a failed attempt.
Yeah,
It's not like it
exactly.
was just how she slipped and that's the way we're introduced to her.
Yeah.
um yeah, no, yeah, no, it's a very, yeah, it's very, but again, like we're talking about all these heavy elements, but the way that Eugenides brings it to life, it's so human, it's so humane, it's so warm for the girls, especially for someone who is, and that's like where the misogyny angle is kind of interesting, or like the reception of the book as a misogynist story is interesting, is that I think he paints, first of all, he's a man writing from the perspective of boys,
Yeah.
of about girls. um and I think there is something, especially it's something that keeps on happening so many times with just art in general, is that just fear of sex of any kind, and especially when it's about teenagers. It's like, or let's say just generally underage people. um it's interesting because every adult every adult has been a teenager. You have to go through it. There's no steps that you can skip to be over 20 years old, you know everyone has experienced being a teenager, has experienced some form of those emotions in one way or another, and has seen their peers going through those very things. I think the portrayal of Lex's promiscuity in the book, and I think just the way he enters or tries to enter the psyche of these girls, can be uncomfortable in the way that it can feel uncomfortable to just think about some people sexually, even though that's, or not even just sexually, but just in very vulnerable, intimate ways, right? I think that's maybe what the problem was. That's like the misogyny angle. It's like, how dare you like try to turn it into this sex object, which, all things considered, is tastefully done in a way that doesn't negate what's actually happening. Like, I find that entire section very dark. But
Are you
just
talking about
dark.
the rooftop stuff?
Yeah, the rooftop of like following the
Hmm.
Trip Fontaine accident with Lux. Um she starts having encounters with men on the rooftops. They sneak in, they have sex, and the boys are looking over from the other side of the street as peeping toms. But yeah, like it's one of those elements where it's not like I don't know. It feels like it's almost missing the point of why
As,
she is doing it, which
hmm
is also why so many other both men and women as teenagers do just kind of like you're feeling so numb. You have almost lost any reason to stay alive that you gravitate to the only thing that makes you feel something, which can be, if it's not sex, it's going to be drugs, it's going to be maybe alcohol to further numb the pain or things like that. I don't know, how do you feel about this
it's
view of the
the
reception potentially?
um I think I'm trying to remember if it's like the book seems to be in parts. Like there's five. I think it's the third or the maybe it's the fourth that begins with like the rooftop sightings that they
Something like
have.
that, yeah.
Um, the way that I processed those passages is very much that they are what they are, and it did make sense to me, although it's not necessarily something that I identify with or would have done, but it's something that I think a lot of people end up doing, um, trying to feel something through sex, and I think that's something that had already been set up as far as her going back to school and maybe being able to escape her emotional problems through, having physical relationships with the boy she was going to school with. And after the Trip Fontaine incident, it starts escalating. But it is another aspect of the mystery because it's something that I've thought about a lot. Like, how is this happening? How are these guys getting into the house? How are they being contacted? These girls never leave the house. How do they know to come there? How is it possible that the parents are sleeping through this or sisters are sleeping through it? We just don't know. And the fact that I think that what saves it from being misogynistic or exploitive or whatever would be thrown at this particular part of the book is that it's incredibly honest, and the
Mhm.
men who end up going there with them, it's not very romantic. There's a lot of things that are involved that are disgusting or sad, or things that she says or does that prove that she's in distress, but may have been missed at the time because the boys weren't there. Um, they didn't experience it, and at the same time, it's something at that age that boys want to see. I thought a lot about like, oh, they got their sexual education from seeing this happening, as far as like what acts could happen, how they're done, what it would look like or possibly feel like, that sort of thing. And of course, that compulsion to not want to stop looking. Whereas from my point of view, I think, I would have responded to it very differently. Like, let's say if I was a teenage girl living across the street and I saw that happening with, a teenage girl, in my neighborhood, I would I'd be like, "Oh my god, I can't look at that." And I think I would be very scared and probably like, "Why is that happening considering everything else that's happened to the house?" Because it's not something that I compulsively wanna look at. I would just see it as another indication that things are going wrong. But then thinking that way, especially this time reading, I thought, "How is it fucking possible that these boys were the only people who saw it? That's just not possible. Other people saw it too, and they probably didn't do anything, or they enjoyed it in their own perverted way or
Mhm.
something, or they ignored it." I don't know. Um, so it's very much from their point of view, and I think it does complicate things. I know there's a passage in the book where they talk about, because that was such like a core memory of their sexual development, that they said that, during these dark nights of the soul that adults have and stuff like that, and I've heard about it from all different, kinds of people, that they're just like, people are having a really hard time or gone through something traumatic. They end up like watching pornography, which I
Hmm.
think is something very interesting to be honest about. And I'll be clear, like, that's not something I've thought about doing or have done myself, but I kind of understand it. Like, oh, it's a way to like numb yourself and calm down. Like there's some sort of release. But in the book, they talk about what arrives like at their bed as lux.
Hmm.
And like I think they call her like the succubus of those nights or something like that. It's a lot more poetic than what I just said. And I thought like I somehow understood that, where I just thought you're so it like being really, really traumatized and trying to numb yourself through sex, but then sex is the trauma and it comes in the form of her and you're still an adult and you're not over that. I think to me it isn't cut and dried, but it made sense to me as far as like how it was just sexually traumatic for everybody, for her,
Mhm.
for the men and boys involved, and then the people who witnessed it, as far as just like the teenage boys themselves. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it-
And it's uncomfortable to accept it that someone might feel like that. Or maybe someone reads the book and sees themselves in it and it's like, I don't like this.
I'm in
I
this
don't like how
picture and
this
I
is
don't
making me
like
feel.
it. Yeah, but I mean, there is
Pretty
a
much. Pretty
compulsion
much.
to look like there's people who just like to people watch. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But I mean, seriously, like, and the other thing is we don't know the ages of these boys, like 14, 15, 16 years old. It's just like, that's gonna be real. Like, it's just not possible to, it's like, well, I'm not gonna look at that, you know? I mean, it's, that's the likelihood of that happening is like very, very slim. So,
Yeah. And it's something that's gonna stick with them as they
oh yeah,
which it does. Um
it's
speaking of
bizarre.
it is. But speaking of all of this, of course, this story connected with many people. It made the career of Eugenides very much beloved because of this, a commercial success. The rights were bought by a studio to adapt into a feature film. They tried to make it happen. It was not working out. And then this young Sofia Coppola, um, not a nobody at the time, but first time feature director, came to their doors with a script. They read it, they loved it, and they officially greenlit it. And that's when we got in 1999 Sofia Coppola's versions of The Virgin Suicides. What are your thoughts, Hilary, on this film? How does it compare to the book as well? I'm very interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I actually have a huge struggle with this movie. I
Ooh,
don't
okay.
usually I've thought about this a lot and I thought, what am I going to say in this podcast? Because I don't want to come in there and trash this film. And this doesn't usually happen to me. There are some people I've met over the course of my life that they like books, and then when they're adapted into the films, they have a lot of problems with it. They say
Hmm.
like it's not exactly like the book, and they have a bunch of complaints about things that were changed. But inevitably, if you are going to adapt a book into a film, it's two different things. And sometimes the best adaptations of a book into film are the ones that depart the most dramatically away from what the book is about. And so I guess like to give you guys an idea, anyone's listening to this, I was 16 when the film came out, and I was 16 when I read the book. And I remember going to go see the film. We drove out of town to see it at an art house theater in a nearby city. And I remember going to see the movie, and it started, and it got to the sequence where the boys are fantasizing about the girls, and they're like in a meadow, and there's a unicorn,
Yeah, the unicorn.
and it like Kirsten Dunst is wearing a lei, and there's hula hoops and stuff. And the reaction I had was like, George C. Scott and hardcore. I was like, turn it off, turn it off. I was like, I think I hate this. This is not what I read. This is just very different. It's turning into like a Tampax commercial. Make it stop. So there's bits and pieces of the film that I think were done very well. I think it was cast perfectly. And the crazy thing about the film is that it's cast against type. Danny DeVito, Scott Glenn,
Ooh.
James Woods, and Kathleen Turner all cast in roles were not they were not usually cast for.
Especially at the time, I would say.
No, absolutely not. And Danny DeVito's only in one scene. Uh, I think I think Scott Glenn is only in one too. Maybe he comes
Pretty
back.
much, yeah. I
I
would
think it's
say
just the
it's like
one scene.
one scene, yeah, yeah. When he visits the household.
But James Woods and Kathleen Turner as the parents, they're not who you'd immediately think of. But the second you see them on screen, I thought, this is very close to the book and what is imagined in your mind. Although I don't usually cast actors when I read a book. And I thought, especially James Woods, I thought, "He is killing this." Even watching this yesterday, I thought, "He is absolutely murdering this role," and it's not what he's known for doing. It's almost the polar opposite of his screen persona and who he is in real life.
Yes.
Exact so, yeah, I have very mixed feelings about the film, but overall, it's to me, it's the way I've told people is that I think of it as like an artifact that kind of represents like this is kind of what it looked like, but it's not what it felt like.
Mm.
Um, the book is a very different experience. It's very although it's short, it's very dense. You almost feel like you're being submerged. Like you mentioned, like warmth. There's so much detail. There's so much that happens that kind of seeps into your consciousness as far as, does this go with that or what did this mean? And all these things, just kind of ebbing and flowing and like bumping into each other, kind of like a pool. And then the film is it's exposed air. It's very much it seems a little anemic because there's just too much in the book and they only have like an hour and a half for the film. Maybe if it had been 2 hours or if it had been directed by someone who directed before. That's the other thing, and this is just the me thing, and if anyone's offended by this, every time I watch a Sofia Coppola film, the more I watch them, the more they fall apart. And, this one,
Ooh,
every time I
okay.
watch it, it's just like, "Oh, this is actually not." Each time it's like, "This is worse than I remember," and it gets a bit worse every single time I watch. To the point where, like, I stopped watching some of them because I thought, like, every time I watch these, I'm gonna enjoy them less. And I don't know why, I really don't. I don't hate Sofia Coppola. But she does kind of maybe I do have a problem because the other thing I was thinking about yesterday while revisiting this film was this is someone who actually didn't live in the suburbs. So it is
Yeah.
someone who doesn't have that viewpoint. Um, her experiences of her life and everything is quite radically different from the girls, but emotionally it was probably the same because a lot of teenage girls feel the same no matter, where they're being raised or what they're going through. But yeah, there was a disconnect and there's just so many problems. Like there's things with like editing and scoring and sound. There's so many moments where it's like there was voiceover and I was just like, that should have been taken out, or like the choice of music in the background. I was like, that's not appropriate. Someone just died. But there's really great moments in the film as well. So I'm just gonna hand the baton to you because I want to hear what you think about the film compared to the book.
That's very interesting to hear. Actually, I had no idea about any of this, which I find very interesting. I'm more positive than you. I'm definitely more positive. This was only my second time watching the film. The first time I watched it, I want to say it was like 2017, 2018. There's probably a letterbox log somewhere of my first time watching it. Um, and I wasn't even a fan of Sofia Coppola. I want to say it's one of the first ones I watched. Outside of like Lost in Translation years ago, that I don't even count, to be honest, as a real viewing experience. But I don't know, there was something that just really worked. It's one of those things where I'd heard about virgin suicides for years and years. Almost always, which I hate with a passion, treated as this like artifact of, just like girly cinema, which I don't like those things. I don't like the separation between like films for girls, films for boys, things like that. It's ridiculous, especially if you're continuing it in 2025 or back then like 2017, whatever. Um, but I did like it quite a bit. It was one of my least favorites of her films. There are some that I do love. My favorite remains Somewhere. I did actually rewatch it. I don't remember if you were on that episode, but we did talk about it years ago at this point. I want to say in 2021 or 2022,
No, I wasn't
on
on that
Uncut
one.
Gems. That was a good episode. That was a very good episode. And that film, for me, still is my favorite of hers. Here, it is a directorial debut. As we mentioned, she did direct a short film prior to it called Lick the Star. I don't
Yes.
like it.
I don't like that one either.
There are some times where you just go like, "Oh my god!" Like it's similar to early Cronenberg for me, where it's like I
Mhm.
really love some things this director has made. I want to go back and just you want to be. I mean, I always hope to be in that mentality where it's like, oh my god, this is the genius. You can see it. It's just so well made for it's like, nah, I don't feel it. I would say terrible is like I find it cringe. Like the story is not for me. I don't get anything out of it. I found it uncomfortable to watch in multiple ways. Just like in the actual physical act of watching it, I don't feel comfortable. I want to be doing something else. I tried rewatching it because I was like, oh, it's in the extras of the Blu-ray of Virgin Suicides. After the opening, I was like, no, no, why? No, that's not it. Um, but no, I do like the film. I think you're spot on with the casting. I
Oh
think it's
yeah, absolutely.
excellent. Someone you haven't mentioned who was kind of like was like, what? Um, Josh Hartnett as Trip Fontaine with
He's
that
perfect, but he needed a
glorious
different
wig.
wig. I was like, that wig has to go. I remember, I mean, the thing is, I was a teenager at the time and I ended up, reading a lot about it, but it was all in magazines and newspapers. And I remember one of the reviews described as like Josh Hartnett with his Dorothy Hamill wig. And I thought, that's it. It's the freaking wig. It's just hard. It's a little harder to take him seriously because he's a good looking guy just all
Oh
around.
yeah.
Like, I understand it. He was cast quite well, but that damn wig, no.
It's from this times, it's the 70s look. It is kind of funny that whenever they showing like the making ofs and whatever, they show actual photographs from the 70s and things like that. You do see so many guys
Yeah.
with that terrible haircut. Bless them.
Mhm.
Those were the days. But no, I think everyone is excellent in this film. And I do really like Sophia's direction as well. There are problems, and I found it interesting where you said um, that each time you revisit one of her films, it gets progressively worse.
It does. And
The,
I don't know why.
I don't. The only other one I've actually revisited properly has been Somewhere. Every other film I've only seen once.
Okay.
So now I'm wondering, I was like, I
Well,
liked it more the first time around, and I was thinking, is
yeah,
it because of the book? Is it because
I
I've read
don't
the book
know.
now? Um,
But like I watched Lost in Translation several years ago and that one started falling apart and I thought I can't
mm,
watch these anymore.
mhm.
But this one I talked about a little bit yesterday because I was recording with Jakob and Randy for Uncut Gems and I said there's aspects of the Virgin Suicides where it is really frustrating because it's like what if you had like because it is almost in some regards it is like student film level. It's like but you have Kathleen Turner and James Woods in it and I said that's so frustrating to watch because there is quite a divide sometimes like when there's times where you can tell the actors are improvising like
Mhm.
and then there's sometimes where you can tell the kids are improvising and it's like night and day. The adult performers bring something to sequences they're in that are just there are great examples of acting on the fly and just working with the material. Sometimes, very obviously, without a script. James Woods was not using a script for at least 3 or 4 scenes that he's in. You can tell he was given an outline and he made it work. Um, Same with Kathleen Turner.
They're
Um,
pros. They're professionals.
they're complete pros. And I have to highlight Kirsten Dunst. No one could have played Lux Lesbian but Kirsten Dunst. She even has the teeth because they talk about how
Yeah.
all these girls have like an extra canine tooth. There's something a little bit off kilter about their teeth, and it makes them seem more interesting. And that's Kirsten Dunst to it, you know, down to the detail. There's things about her that are a little bit different than the typical all-American attractive blonde girl. Things that are a little bit that are just very unique that make her visually appealing, especially like right at that time, at that age. I think she was 16 when she shot
Yeah.
this, where it's just like that's who that is. That's who it is in the book. With once again, without casting in my head, I just can't think of anyone else.
She has become the face of it in a way. I think it's
Yes.
impossible to separate the two.
Mhm.
Um,
And that's a problem I had with the movie as well, is that I knew all of those girls, and the movie very much is the Kirsten Dunst show, where the sisters recede even more into the background and are more non-entities or don't very have much to do or anything to
yeah,
distinguish them as compared to the book.
yeah. That's been one of my problems revisiting it, which again, like we always had this conversation on the show, just by the nature of adaptation. You mentioned it as well, very well earlier. It's just like, I mean, you have to accept it as its own separate thing. Um, but this time around, compared to other times, which is interesting, I did have this little voice in the back of my head where it's like, Sofia Coppola comes from a privileged background.
Yes, it does. It's like poking like a little needle in the back of my brain where I'm like, she doesn't know what she's talking about or
Yeah.
what she's portraying, you know?
There's one of the
Oh.
one of the featurettes where she's talking and she's like, yeah, wanting to represent the suburban American family. I was like, is
You
you? And then she's like, oh yeah, when I was in my early 20s in Tokyo, just living there. I was like, whoa, whoa,
yeah, it's
whoa. How do you know
yeah.
about like living in the suburbs? She said
It's
so much, like
more
she spent her first, was it like 3 years of her life or something in in the shooting Apocalypse Now? Wasn't she like
yeah,
that?
the kids were there. I do remember that detail that wherever he would go, the family would go, which and I think in some ways is healthy. So there isn't that separation. But
Sure.
during the shooting of Apocalypse Now, I'm sure that was a lot. Um, but yeah, like with her, it's very much about aesthetics. And a film professor summed up very nicely while I was going to film school. He says Sofia Coppola films are all about surface. You know, some people get
Hmm.
something out of it, some don't. So she did talk about that. She looked at a lot of that. She was drawn to the aesthetics of the film because she liked photographs of the suburbs in Japan. So she had like I think as far as like imagery of like, oh, this is what suburban houses look like, and this is how people dressed in the 70s, like the production design, the costuming, um, the cinematography, all of those pieces are there. But as far as, what it didn't it's really hard to connect with the characters. It's almost kind of like I think one time I described this film as like, it was definitely before this time, but with the explosion of YouTube, like fashion films
Hmm.
where they have like kind of like depictions of clothing lines that are directed by sometimes famous directors
It's like the
or
Mew
things like
Mew
that.
Women's Tales,
Yeah, things like
which
that where
she
it's like
directed
women.
one, I think,
Oh,
as
I'm
well.
sure she's probably done more than a few, but like women in fields or in certain visual environments with a particular kind of music and a certain kind of mood. The Virgin Suicides already kind of feels like that, and it doesn't surprise me that in the years since Virgin Suicides has been subsumed into like I don't know if that's the right word, but it's been consumed or it's being consumed through like Pinterest boards or Tumblr aesthetics.
Oh, yeah,
I wouldn't
yeah.
be surprised if it's become part of like the female incel movement as far as a rejection of men through death. Kind of like sadcore Lana Del Rey, like probably become a part of that
Yeah, 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 yeah.
internet stuff. And then at the same time with the book, I found this really funny because okay, the book's written by a man, film's directed by a woman. It's the
Mhm.
same story. And you saw this on Goodreads just like I did. It's definitely taking that beating that I think a lot of, films and pieces of art are where it's like it was written by a man, so therefore it is trash.
Mhm.
And then you go on Letterbox and because it's directed by a woman, it's, a masterpiece. And it's like it's the same thing. It's the same story. So what is going on here? You're taking what you want from it and rejecting the rest. And I find that kind of disappointing on some levels. And I kind of hope that both of those opposite poles kind of like fade out or die because the story is just the story. A man wrote it, you know, that's, you can't really change that and be like, well, because a woman directed it, now it's relevant to, my tastes and interests and, men suck. It's like it was written by a guy. So there you
Yeah,
have it.
and I don't think it's. I found it interesting because it's not one of those cases where. Sorry, it's not one of those cases where there's big changes from the book. To be honest, like there's no plot points that are completely altered. There's no logical leaps that are jumped over. I don't know, like it is truly down to the aesthetic. And I would say also it's down to the scope,
Hmm.
because that's something that I mentioned it before and I will repeat it. I really love the way Eugenides brings to life the place, the people and the place, those elements of the racism, which also was in the back of my mind. It's like Sofia Coppola and racism.
Oh
Something
yeah,
that's so tricky.
I don't think is there any, I didn't really look, but it's like I don't think there's any people of color in the movie unless I'm really spaced
Just like the
something.
Beguiled.
Yes, and her defense of that, I was like, actually, especially because if you see the original The Beguiled, like you need that woman there because she's the only person who knows that Clint Eastwood is up to something, and it's kind of like, I know what you're doing,
It's
and to
so
remove that,
fascinating.
oh, it's like you gotta have that character in there because she's a reality check, and I like that reality check. But anyway,
Yeah, that's a conversation like Sofia Coppola and racism, or trying not to be racist by avoiding. I don't know. That's an interesting conversation for another time.
hmm
But it is something that I do like about the book a lot. Is everything that we talked about, just like the feeling of time and place, which here you said it perfectly. Honestly, like you already said this. It's surface level. It's like it's perfectly put together. um I don't feel it was funny like listening to the cinematographer and Coppola talking about like the film stocks and the thing of making it feel like like a Badlands and the film from the 70s. Like it still feels very 90s.
yes, it does. I don't get
It has
Malik vibes at all, but
it's the
sure,
I want to say it's also the montage feeling to it, which is part of the book in a way. um I don't think it's unfilmable per se, but since it's essentially a rich tapestry of characters just surrounding these girls whose perspective we never truly enter, I think it makes sense to kind of focus more on Lux. I think Lux has the most things happening in the book that translate to cinema.
yeah,
It's like, okay, we need to follow someone, we can follow Lux. This way we can have this romance with Trip Fontaine, and we can have, all those things surrounding her primarily, where she becomes the object of desire, the obsession. I did kind of like that scene that you mentioned, the one where they are reading the diary and it's all this colorful, like the unicorn and the thing. But because it does accurately portray, I want to say, children's perception of girls being happy.
yeah, I
It's like
guess
that
so.
cliche. It's like, look, just oh my god, we're reading their diary. They must be so happy. And also, I think it's funny that it was shot by Roman Coppola, that sequence, which is like different perspective, different style. Um, it's cute. It's cute. But yeah, I don't know. There is an slight element of childishness, of
Yeah.
immaturity, to be honest, to just the directing in that sense. Where I think nowadays I mean, she didn't do any of that. I imagine in Priscilla or On the Rocks, or she's been subtracting more and more in a way that I almost feel like wants to she wanted to prove that she's more than just this Tumblr, Pinterest, all colors, all aesthetic style. At least that's what it feels like to me with her newer films. Rewatching Virgin Suicides. Do you like some of her more recent output, or maybe
Um,
you've avoided it?
I,
Which
I
would you
actually
say?
I did. I didn't watch
Okay.
On the Rocks and I haven't watched Priscilla, but I
Hmm.
mean overall, like as time went on and especially like you start, getting older and realizing what life is really like. Because there's a big difference between being 16 years old and seeing the Virgin Suicides and then, everything happens to you and then you watch it at like, 28, 36, whatever age you are. And with her films in particular, like you kind of, you talked about that voice in the back of your head, like she comes from a very privileged background. And it got to a certain point where it's like, man, like, okay, thing that kind of draws all these films together is that these are all women who they like to lie down a lot and they don't have jobs. Like everything's taken care of for them, like,
Yeah.
or it's maybe during a time where they're not working. I mean, with Lost in Translation, it's a little bit more vague. She's in a country accompanying her husband. She probably does have a job at home, but a lot of it is like women or girls mostly like lounging their underwear in fields or on their beds or dreamily looking out of windows, like, ennui and all of that. And there's not really anything wrong with that, but if
She's talking about what she knows. That's
she's
that's
talking
something
about
I've
she
always used. Is that it sounds like that's her perspective, you know.
Yeah, when I was in Japan, just, doing stuff, yeah, it does come across in that viewpoint. And I mean, I suppose that is a part of, growing up. You do have like some leisure time, but like with Marie Antoinette, for example, when that film came out, I mean, there were criticisms around it because it very much emphasized, what's going on in Versailles and what's going on in
Mhm.
her little fantasy world. And outside of that, there's people who are starving and dying who eventually, break into that
Mhm.
fantasy near the end and disrupt things. And that's where she chooses to end it because it's like, why show all of the horrible stuff that happened afterwards? We wanted the pretty stuff with the cakes and the pretty rooms and the lavish costumes and her feeding a lamb in the middle of a field while, Aphex Twin is playing or
Yep.
something.
Yeah.
That's what I guess that does like that is the sort of stuff that does get folded into girly cinema is very much, like we said, like the aesthetics, the surface level of that's really pretty, and you can take a lot of pleasure out of that. But I think for someone like me, especially as I got older and life beats the shit out of you, if you're not Sofia Coppola, you do need to get a job. You have disappointments in your life. If you want a film to get made or to make art or anything like that, you don't have connections that can start passing around a script, or your father can't buy the rights for you, things like that. You do end up, it's actually Yakov brought up. This is totally related, but we were talking about this metaphor yesterday, where it's like it's really hard if like you're splashing around in the water, like in the ocean, and you're like trying to drown and you're struggling, and there's someone who's alone on a boat near you, and they're crying because like they're having a hard time too. They're stranded in a boat, but they're in a fucking boat, you know
Yep.
and
Yep.
you're in the water. And I've definitely felt like that throughout my life where it's like I empathize with you, you're in your boat, but you're like in the boat with your family and your family loves you and you have oars and I don't have anything and I'm just thrashing around. So sometimes with art that comes from that place or represents that sort of thing, it can be frustrating. And so I'm bringing this up because it says something about me where it's like I can't completely buy things like cleanly or aesthetically because I know it doesn't match my experience and I also know it's not entirely true for 95% of the people who are alive. So,
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And I think it kind of speaks to just the power of her as a filmmaker that I know some people thankfully don't listen to the podcast, so I can say this. Um but I know some people who have made, and they are exactly what you mentioned actually in the beginning of this conversation. They have made Virgin Suicides and Sofia Coppola cinema just their life aesthetic in a
yeah.
way,
And
and they
isn't
want
that
to
wonderful?
replicate it. And I think it's beautiful, and it's kind of surprising in a way also that it's coming from people who are generally very critical about like privilege and things like very militant. That exactly what you were mentioning earlier with like the because it's men therefore bad and that type of
I
thing.
can't wait for that to die, especially if we're talking about
And it,
gender. This is just an aside, it's just like we need to be more accepting of gender. We've got to accept people who are non-binary, and there's like people who feel very strongly about trans rights and stuff like that. Then you need to stop. I don't see any difference. Like sometimes there's just reviews for films. I'm sure you've seen it too, because like we're both on Letterboxd and Goodreads, and the
Mhm.
review will just be like, "I hate men." How is that any
Four
different than
stars.
or it's like a man? Imagine a man writing that like 4 stars for something, and they just write, "I hate women." It's just it's just fucked up thinking. You gotta what people should be writing because I understand where it's coming from,
Hmm.
and I've talked to other women about it, it's like you don't hate men, you hate patriarchy, and
Yep.
patriarchy is fucking with and hurting men too. That's the problem. Do you hate trans men? And then their eyes start rolling in the back of their head, like, okay, I think I'm gonna have to like backpedal a little bit, and rethink some things. It's not that
I think I'm
simple.
gonna
So
need nuance, in my opinion.
yeah, start changing your reviews. I hate patriarchy. Patriarchy is the problem. There's men out there who hate the same things just as much as you do. Believe me, I've talked to them. So,
Very true. Very true. And yeah, and I would even say like I wouldn't say more guys should watch the Virgin Suicides to understand women. I don't think it's that type of film. I also don't think we should necessarily always gravitate to art for some of those things. I think it can be definitely the film. Speaking about the film, it can be a good conversation starter. Um, about some of those, I think just about if we're talking about like men watching it, I think it could be interesting to showcase a glimmer of what's happening on the other side. How
mhm.
they actually think, how they actually feel. Um, in the hope of maybe sparking more curiosity and actually engaging with girls, women, depending on the age you're in, on a more um, at the same level in a way, on a more equal level.
Hmm.
But also, I don't know. There's I think you said it before as well that there are so many scenes in here. Not so many, but there are some scenes that are a bit like weird. Just
Yeah.
they come off a bit weird. Some of them are played for laughs and they don't necessarily land. There's one moment with there's one of the Schwartzmans, one who didn't have a big career afterwards, who's like pretending to be this big man and he's flirting with Kathleen Turner, which feels that one feels like one of those ad lib
Improvised.
moments that you mentioned, yeah, improvised. Doesn't really work for me. I get what they were going for. Doesn't really
No.
work for me. But then you have so many other moments that I think it's iconic at this actually iconic at this point. But the makeout session in the car between Lex and Trip works
Yeah.
great.
Wow.
Um,
What a hard
everything with
scene to adapt, and they did it.
yeah, yeah.
Ugh,
Just the beat
crazy.
that just all those beats. I think the Scott Glenn scene is very much underrated. I never really truly see it mentioned. I don't see him mentioned. Even though he has a larger role in the book. I do like the character of the priest.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think that part is great. I like the ending as well. There's something in the way that she manages to adapt the sudden way. Not it's not even just the sudden way that the boys find some of the sisters in the house and then just like run away,
Hmm.
but it's that hard cut to all of them in the car
Yes.
bathed in sunlight. I feel that moment is just like that's where the emotions come in. I think that moment is emotional. The moment where Lux is abandoned in the field by Trip is emotional. Like there are those nuggets. The musical montage. I'm a sucker for a good musical montage. And the moment, which again, I was reading the book and I was like, wait, was this was in the film, right? And for some reason, I forgot the sequence in the film, but it's all pretty much the same exact songs that Eugenides mentions in the book, where the boys and the girls are interacting via
Yeah.
telephone by playing records in their respective households. I found it to be very beautiful. But again, it is something that's in the book directly brought to life. There's so many instances of that where it is just like, oh, she managed to somehow make it work. I think it's commendable in a way.
Hmm. I think the scenes that work for me the best are the ones that actually where she allows the camera just to roll. There's
Hmm.
two, and coincidentally, they both take place on the front porch of the Lisbon house. The scene after Cecilia has landed on the fence.
Just that wide
Um,
shot.
that wide shot, and you start hearing the noises coming out of the girls reacting, which I thought that's very accurate as far as like people responding to death that way. That shock, you just start hearing, you know, just and
Mm,
she makes all of the girls face the house, and the noise is coming out of Kathleen Turner where she's just looking at her daughter dead, and then the sprinklers turn on. I don't
mm,
think the sprinklers that doesn't happen in the book, but it's this addition of something that is very suburban to that scene. It's very darkly comic. Like, yeah, they do have their sprinklers go on at night. We don't really know why, and it's the worst timing. Um,
yep.
but at the same time, I struggled with the scene because I thought, wait a minute, like, and it's that book nitpicking thing because it's like, well, she fell off out of the side window of the house onto a fence that was between the houses, and the fence was wood, and she fell face down, so everything was moved around because of time, because of just like the design of the house, budget constraints, all these things that have to happen with the movie. But I remember the first time I saw it, I thought like the everything about it had to be changed, but it took me out of it. I was just like, there's the fence is in the right place, she's face up, but there's probably just so much stuff that they had to. It wasn't a high budget movie,
No,
and
which is surprising, honestly. Like they did make the
they got
most
to
they
work.
could. Yeah.
Yeah, they really did, and I think I would have struggled with that from a production standpoint as far as, how much can we show or portray about certain things that are in the book that I think they probably didn't even have time for, as far as, the production schedule and the money in film stock. So
Which is something I have to say, it's something I find very admirable about Sofia Coppola's ethos, work ethic as a filmmaker, is that, I mean, yeah, comes from a privileged background, father is whoever who he is, whatever. But she's always had, I mean, it's the being in a boat with problems type thing.
mhm,
But she has always had problems like with the funding of the movies, with getting them made.
mhm,
I still haven't seen Priscilla, and I hate that I haven't seen it because I do really like her films overall. But I do remember that she publicly stated, like, yeah, we had this whole sequence planned. I want to say it's like in Los Angeles or something, and they just had no money, so they had to cut 20 pages of the script. Just like an actual part, almost an act of the movie had to go because they had no money
oh,
for that.
really?
Yeah,
I had no
yeah.
idea. I really wonder what those 20 pages were, because seeing it
What?
yesterday, I
Yeah.
thought like this should have been 2 hours, because the pacing of the film was off. In the book, you really get a sense of like this happens over like 13 or 14 months, and the
Hmm.
slow decline of the house, how disgusting the house gets, how just this, like the smell of it, and then like the details of it being cleaned out and what is found in there after everything goes down. All of that kind of gets lost in the mix because we said, there's constraints. Whereas in the
Yeah.
movie, it's like, oh, this happened in like, it seems like it happened in like 3 months. Like it happened really fast.
Yeah. It moves very quickly. I think that's, you don't have, but also, yeah, I think just by the way that the movie's structured, you don't get that epilogue
Hmm.
that also probably wouldn't have helped. I think it is one of those things where having the epilogue, I think, fits with the book, gives you that extra closure,
Yeah, and
but
that
also it
Mary's
just like
still alive
drag.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just drags things. Um, well, on the flip side, I'm very glad it's in the book. That's something that surprised me completely reading the novel. I was like, oh my god, like oh my god, they're meeting with the mom years later and just talking about this.
And the dad, they meet
And the
Lisbon.
dad, yeah.
And
All
of
those
course Trip. Yeah.
trip, yeah. Just going back to the scene of of the crime, essentially. Um, and thinking, looking back at it, like there's that whole element which I did not know was present in the book. Um, but yeah, no, I have to say also props. We didn't say that, but there are passages of the book that are directly quoted or adapted,
Yes.
read by Giovanni Ribisi, which is
Yes.
good choice. It's again like sometimes I just wonder how did he become whoever he is. Was it, does he also come from like a privileged background? Because sometimes it's like, wow, how did he pop up in this film or that thing or whatever? But love him, love him. We love. I think he has a very unique voice that actually makes me wonder: has he ever read an audiobook of The Virgin Suicides? Because that would be very interesting, actually.
I don't know. I'm sure there's an audiobook version of it, and I
I
do
listened
wonder
to
who
some of
would
it
read it.
actually, but it
Do you know who read
wasn't.
it?
I can find it, but I don't remember. Like it didn't have a name that made me go, "Oh, it's whoever." So the audiobook was read by Nick Landrum.
Mm,
Was a good audiobook. I have to say, it was good. It was good.
sure.
I read some parts of it, like listened to some parts of it, while reading the book. It's something I'm doing occasionally if I have the time for it. It's just interesting having that extra voice. Just helps um focus a bit more, especially with names. There's something about just like the names and the things, but
Oh yeah.
um
And there's a lot in here as far as, names. People are mentioned multiple times, people mentioned once.
which they do in the film as well. I think it could have been
Yeah.
so easy for her to just have, okay, I'm gonna cast four boys and it's them for the entire film. Instead, there is also a bit of that confusion because they do all look alike. They all look like teenagers. And
Yeah, I
sometimes it's
still
like,
don't know who is who, and I've seen the film several times, like, "Oh, is that Chase? I think that's Parky. That's
yeah,
Kevin." Like, because they don't really even say their names.
no,
You
they
know who
just,
Paul Baldino is, although
unless they're properly introduced, yeah, you don't have that.
Paul Baldino is described very vividly in the book, and I thought it was so funny during the making of. They said, "Well, I cast my cousin in this because he looks like the character," and I thought, "No, he's the polar opposite of the character. You kind of cast like a skinny a skinny kid who looks young, and a Paul Baldino is like a heavier set, like more kind of like stout kid with like shadows under it. They say he has like shadows under his eyes, like a kid who's already seen stuff, and it's just like you just cast a family member in that
She
role, and I
just
mean
she
that's
just liked
fine.
Robert Schwartzman, you know. Like,
Yeah,
man, it's my buddy, my cousin,
yeah.
because
Or I mean, she
yeah,
cast her childhood friend, or Leslie Hayman as Therese, and she's great as Therese. It's very sweet. All the girls are cast very well.
yeah,
Hannah Hall is Cecilia, and Chell Swain, who I don't think I've seen in anything else. Same with Leslie Hayman. AJ Cook. Oh yeah, we need to mention that Hayden Christensen plays one of the girls' homecoming dates,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
he was just the baby in it.
Yeah, almost unrecognizable. It's one of those things. Like looking at the cast, I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's who he was." Like
I had
there's
to go back and watch it again. I was like, he's in that in this movie
little
I own.
light
Oh,
bulb
there he
moments.
is. He's
Like
just
those
the
little
he's
light
just this
bulb
little kid.
is. Yeah, I, I don't know. Like overall, I am very positive about the film. I think we can even go into our final thoughts at this point.
Hmm.
I do want to say it is one of those not rare instances, but I went into prepping for this episode thinking book is probably going to be very good, but so Coppola is special. The way she makes movies, man. She just gets women, dude. I thought I would be way more positive about the film, but actually find myself very surprised in saying that ultimately I actually enjoyed the book much more than I did the film. And it's a rare instance where having read the book before the movie, it didn't necessarily enhance the film, but it actually made a couple of elements worse than the
Yes.
first time. And also, just generally, I didn't mention it. I think the pacing kind of falls apart after the big high school dance. I think up until there, it's like great. And then the last 30 minutes are a bit, with the rooftop and everything, it's just a bit wobbly. It feels
Hmm.
more like a checklist of the novel. It's like, we need this because, we have to get to this point. So we need this and we need this and we need this. Well, everything else before that, I would say it flows fairly organically. But yeah.
Yeah.
How do you
No.
feel? Like book and I mean, I imagine. How do you
Well,
feel
I think the
between the book?
mistake that's made is that if someone's listening to this and they've never seen the film and they've never read the book, what I would
Mhm.
recommend is watch the film first. Because I mean, the
That's
film
a good
obviously
point.
can stand on its own, and it has much. I think it's had much longer of a lifespan and a lot more of a cultural impact than the book it was based on. I mean, just by virtue of being a film, it's shorter, it's easier to consume, of course. But I'd say, yeah, watch the film first, and then you're going to read the book, and it's very likely that your reaction will be like Nicholas and mine, where it's like, "Holy shit, this book." I mean, you really do feel like you are dropped into something, and you live in it for however long you're reading it, and it's very you feel very involved. It's a different experience for sure. So that would be my recommendation. As far
Good.
as like what order.
That's actually a very good recommendation. I would say that's essentially what I experienced. And I think it helped also having, yeah, like 7, almost 8 years of time between watching the film for the first time and reading the book, where it almost felt like a fresh experience. Like not remember, like, oh, this is in the film, this is in the film, that's in the film.
Hmm.
Um, we'll get into our favorite scenes in a second, but every time I thought about the Virgin Suicides in the past years, there was one image that always came to mind, and it's one of my favorite images from the film. Is just like that very sad wide shot of Lux waking up in the field,
Oh
like going
yeah,
from that tight blue tinted close up to just that wide shot of emptiness. Like it just gives you this gut punch feeling of like fuck. But
yeah.
yeah.
That's bad. And then her in the taxi cab
Oh, just
driving
noodling
home.
on the
That's just
tiara, the reflections on the thing. It's yeah. It's
Yeah, and just knowing that she's busted. Yeah, I didn't mention it. The two front porch scenes is when it's just a taxi cab and she just
ah.
doesn't cut. And she goes and you see James Woods come out first. And the first thing you hear him say is like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And he like
Mhm.
actually like I think he tugs at her dress, like, "Are you hurt or anything?" And then Kathleen Turner shows up and starts shouting. And they end up just going directly into the house, and you know that it's just going to get way worse after that. Just letting the camera roll and letting actors who are really good do their thing.
Hmm.
Those are the moments that work the best in this film for me.
Will those be your favorite scenes then, officially?
I think so. There is one brief cut to, it's like not even a scene. I think it's after their it's after they've exchanged songs over the phone with one another,
Hmm.
which is such a compelling sequence, not even in the film, but in the book as well, because you don't, I mean, the way that I read things is that as far as the night where they all die, it's very intentional where it's like, we know we're being watched by the boys in the neighborhood. We're going to kill ourselves. We don't want this to stop. So we need to have them come to the house and be distracted so we can do this.
Hmm.
And that no one will dial 911. But then why did they have this conversation and like, they leave out the inclusion of I want to make it with you, which was like this kind of earth-shattering moment for the boys. Like maybe they do have feelings for us back, and then that all
Hmm.
just goes out the window. But there's a brief scene after that where it just shows James Woods in a doorway, and you could hear Kathleen Turner and Kirsten Dunst off screen talking to each other. And I think Lux says, "I'm suffocating in here." And Mrs. Lisbon says, "But you're safe here." And she says, "I can't breathe in here." And I think that's the only real insight we get into what might be happening in the house. Um, and it's 10 seconds long. It's just like it's this missing piece where it's like, I feel like I want more of that, but it doesn't really exist in the book.
Hmm.
Um, and it's just this very sad moment. Um, and it's a really well acted piece. But another thing I noticed, and once again, I'm nitpicking here, is that Coppola didn't direct the other three surviving sisters to act depressed. They're acting completely neutral. It's obvious that Kirsten Dunst knows how to play depression, and you can tell that she's having a hard time. But when they show the girls in the house, they just kind of seem bored but occupied and fine. So they don't really.
They're
They needed a bit
chilling.
more. Yeah, it's
They're
like why
chilling.
they don't seem like people who are about to hang themselves or gas themselves in the kitchen. All of that. So the more I watch this, the more there's issues. There's
No,
things that could have been changed.
yeah, no, I get that. I will actually, yeah, I will flip this because I will say my favorite film scene as well. Actually, I mentioned the outside shot, but I like that entire sequence. But just the general high school dance. It's like this last. It's it's
Mm.
it's just pure Americana. It's pure American iconography and what you expect. It's like the homecoming. It's the king and queen were celebrated. I like that there's those little moments from the book as well that are recreated, like the drinking under the rafters with the, what was it, like a peach soda,
Peach schnapps. It's
peach
peach
schnapps,
schnapps.
peach
Yes.
schnapps, and just, which is more grotesque in the book, the description of like this spitting and passing it between the two,
Oh
which
God.
again, it's so specific, where it's like, yeah, you can see that.
That's
Like
yeah,
it
it's something that
says,
seems like a sexy idea, but
yeah,
like these are kids who don't know what they're doing, so it's gonna be terrible.
yeah. But I like those little inclusions, and I think just the music in that sequence and the way they shot it and framed it. I am a sucker for like very tragic stories where you have that last moment of happiness before everything goes to shit, and I think that part is
Oh
beautifully
yeah.
executed. And then yeah, just the playing the records, even though that's one of the sequences where, having read the book prior to watching the film, enhanced it. One of very few scenes that felt better after having read the book. Um, because actually Eugenides like describes the difference between like the types of songs we were choosing and the songs they were choosing. You have a time to think about that in the book. It makes you
Hmm.
think about that in the book, but you don't really get it in the film. So even rewatching it, I was like, oh yeah, those are songs I like as well. And I was like, no, no, wait, no, there's a reason why it's this specific songs for the boys, this specific songs for the
Yeah,
Lisbons.
like that took a lot of work. Like, okay, what were hits in the 70s that could be in conversation with each other?
Yeah, yeah.
And
But
there actually one thing I did check is that I think they end with the Simon Garfunkel song Bridge Over Troubled Water. And or
maybe.
no, there was something about them laying there and then eventually Cecilia comes up and they're ignoring it, although it's referencing this, deceased younger sister. And I thought, I'm gonna look that up
Mm.
Is Cecilia later in the rotation on that album? And it is like maybe 10 minutes later. So I thought he's so detailed. He actually went back and looked at the record to see if that was possible and if that could check out in reality. There's so many details about this, about the book in particular. Like even the girls' names say so much because they're all like Therese, Mary, Bonaventure, and Cecilia are all Catholic saints.
Hmm.
And Lux, I always felt like Lux might have been the one that maybe Mr. Lisbon had a little bit of input on what she would be named because it's a measurement of light. But it
Hmm.
also, I think it's see Mrs. Lisbon accepting it because it's also, used as used in a like religious like music pieces and stuff like that, like
Yeah,
Light
yeah,
Eternal, things like that. So there's just tons and tons of stuff that the more I read it, the more I'm just like, wow, does he have a map? I bet he has a map
yeah.
of the neighborhood. And I'm like, why is it not in the book?
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
he definitely had like a character chart of some
oh
sort.
my gosh,
It's
I
like
want
here's
that.
everyone's job
And
or
where
maybe
they
he just winged
live,
it. It's also possibly just like winged it naturally, just like
possibly. Maybe he has the
making it
brain
up.
for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe. Have you read anything else actually by him?
I did. I
Or
read Middlesex and I read The Marriage Plot, and they're, to be clear, they're just very different books.
hmm.
They're well written. I wouldn't say they're on the level of Virgin Suicides as far as like how compelling they are. They also do tend to be longer and
Okay.
cover a broader scope. But yeah, as far as his writing, I would say definitely, this is the one to read. And I am curious, he did release several years ago a series of short stories, and I wonder if those
Mm,
are more akin to this, like just really short stuff that, pack a punch, but I
mm.
haven't read them yet.
And what would be your favorite quote, your favorite passage from the book then?
Um, as weird as it is, I think I have the ending of this book memorized,
Ah, okay.
like the
It's
last
not weird. It's
sentence.
not weird.
But another passage that I highlighted, I won't read out loud, is I just really enjoyed this long paragraph of what happens after Cecilia has died. And the boys kind of leave in a daze from the party, and then they go to the rooftop to kind of see if they can see anything else or kind of
Ah,
keep an eye on
mhm.
what's happening. And the sun just slowly sets and they see their city, and of course there's the implication of, bigger problems beyond, especially with, the strikes and race riots and stuff like that happening, but very, very far away. And then it just slowly turns dark. But um, I'll see, like, okay, maybe I can recite the last line of the book.
No pressure. No
Okay.
pressure.
Because it's different in the movie than it is in the book. So I think I'll probably botch it. So I think it didn't matter in the end how old they had been or that they were girls, but that we had loved them and they didn't hear us, still did not hear us, calling them from the treehouse with our thinning hair and soft bellies, calling them out of those rooms where they went to be alone for all time, alone in suicide, and where we will never find the pieces to put them back together. Crazy. I don't know. I didn't set out to memorize that, but there's a few things I've encountered in my life where it's like I haven't memorized and I don't know how, and that's one of them.
It
What was
sticks with you.
yours?
Yeah. In mine, like there are so many passages that are beautiful, poetic, long.
Yes.
But actually reading it, there is one part that kind of plays actually in what you were saying as well, that the film does very much put the other sisters to the side. And there is this extended
Hmm.
part after the homecoming dance where they're all in the car going back, like Lux and Trip are doing their own thing, and the girls are going back with the boys who chaperone them, and they're just like trying to connect with them, and the guys are clearly not interested. Like they're doing it as a favor, as pity, as maybe we'll get lucky, or we're not getting lucky. Okay, I don't care that much. Empty promises, I hate those. But it's like, yeah, one of the kids like, you're gonna call me, right? Yeah, yeah, of course. It's like he never did call her, never did
But
call
he
her.
goes back to the house. I actually paid attention. Joe Hill Connolly was one of the guys who went back to the house
Goes back.
and he saw her hanging there. I mean, there's if you yeah, the more you read it, the more you pay attention, the more devastating it
You would
gets.
feel absolutely. You would have that on your conscience for the entire rest of your life if
Yeah.
something like that actually happened. But there
There is
is
a
one.
reference to therapy offices at one point in here, and I thought
Mhm.
like, yeah, all these guys should be in therapy. It's absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
Just, oh, anyway, sorry, I interrupted. What
No,
were
no,
you
no. Of
saying?
course, no worries, no worries. And there is one passage in there where it's actually Therese who's talking, and she just says, which is like, there's so much repression from like not really wanting to speak up, and it's one of the few moments where someone actually does, where she says, Cecilia was weird, but we're not. And then we just want to live, if anyone would let us. And that's
Mhm.
it's one of those moments where like I was reading, I was like, I had to stop. I was like, wait, let me let me go back again just for a second, and just like I don't, it's such, it's one of those things where it's one of those things that saying it out loud feels almost ridiculous because it's such raw emotions. It just like, I don't feel like I'm allowed to live right now. And it's one
Mhm.
of those things like, well, of course you can. It's like, the family, they love you and the thing. It's like, no, 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 but actually, like, this is how I'm feeling. And the fact that none of the boys like react in any way to that.
No.
It just like cuts. And then a few minutes later, they were dropped out at the house, and that was that. It's like, okay, okay,
Sure.
this is
But they come back. That's one of the things that they kind of are dizzy from the experience, and then they come back, and that's
because they
the
don't have the tools to know how to
No, they
react.
don't. They're kids. That's the thing, is like you were saying earlier, hindsight's 2020, and you look back on that when you're 35 and it said, "Oh, she said that to me, and I didn't
Could have,
understand what that
should have,
meant." And now she's
didn't.
dead. She died, you know? And then they go back to the house and they say that the girls, like, I think one of the girls like tries to put her hand to the window and the lights go out. And that's one of the last images they see of them before everything goes
Hmm.
south. It's just, it's so heartbreaking. And I mean, especially Therese, I've thought about Therese over the years. She was the oldest, and she had to go through this, possibly this whole pantomime of going to school just so her parents wouldn't suspect something. It's just, it's so sad. I mean, just all of it. And you don't, I mean, of course I don't understand. I still don't understand what they were packing. Like, they had all the trunks and stuff like that, and they put everything in trunks, and everything was out all over the house. When the boys came over, there was coats and sewing machines, and what
Yeah,
was
we're thinking of leaving.
happening?
I don't know.
And the thing is that they were leaving the house. That's the other thing that I find so easy to forget, is that they were leaving their house. They were free to leave, and they were leaving notes all over the place. It's just, there's so much, like, by the time you're done, you're like, I think I need to be in therapy about this. What
I need
happened?
someone to talk to about this,
Exactly. I've
which is
never
what we
talked
kind
about
of
in
did.
this book. This is what we're doing. This is the first time I've talked to someone about this book and how
Hey,
devastating it is. It's so
it's
sad.
truly special. It's truly a special book. I have a little like favorite. Like, I don't. I'm generally more positive with like films when I watch films. When I used to give stars to films, but with books I'm always around like the 3 or 4 stars. But this is one of those rare like 5 stars. After finishing it,
Yeah.
I was like, this is instantly. I don't want to say it's one of the best. I mean, we are kind of on a roll here with the books we've been talking about recently. To be honest, but yeah, no, no, no. This is another like great read that actually I liked more than the film, which is kind of a rarity on this podcast, and I'm happy when it happens. I don't want to
Yeah,
be a
it's
movie
true.
shill. I don't want to be like, the film is better because it sounds bad. Sometimes it's true though. Sometimes you just connect with it on a deeper level. Maybe there's more history. But with this one, it's one of those classics. The book did it better, for
It
sure.
did. I'm just thinking about those girls. I'm thinking about Bonnie. And I sometimes, I think about Mary and what Mary wanted to be, and Mary was so tightly controlled, and she just everything they wanted to be, it just didn't happen. It's just, I'm still devastated. I'm still devastated, and they're not real. That's that's the power of this book. And I thought about other books that I consider my favorites. Like, this is definitely one of them, but um things that don't completely make sense. Like, I like Candide. I like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I
Mm.
wrote down Wuthering Heights, although I'll be very clear, I like that book for very different reasons than the what is assumed. I'm not into the romance. There's just other things going on in there that are
Heathcliff,
much more
save
interesting.
me.
Never. He's hanging dogs from trees, girl. Get a better boyfriend.
You can change him. You can change.
You can't change him. He's too far gone. But their movie, the thing that ties all those books together, as far as like they're books that I find myself reading over and over again, or I think about a lot, is it's just like, what happened here?
Mhm.
Or things just don't make sense. And of course, finding that comfort with like life just doesn't make sense. It's like probably like why you and I like David Lynch films, because it's like, life doesn't make sense. These films don't make sense. I think they reflect the
Just
fact
deal
that
with
life
it.
doesn't make sense. Yeah, you better roll with it.
Beautifully, beautifully put. Thank you so much, Hillary, for being here on this episode of Anatomy and Adaptation. If our listeners want to follow your writing and your work, where can they find you?
Oh, yes, you can find me in the usual place. I'm just going to say the usual. You can find me on Letterboxd under the name Degelle, Degelle, or you can find me at Goodreads under the same name. But if you do go to Letterboxd, there is a link there, a campsite link. And if you click that, it'll take you to my blog and Goodreads as well and everything else. And right now I'm working on a piece for my blog about trigger warnings in the media space. I'm hoping to get it
Ooh.
finished today, but my gosh, it's turned into a big behemoth, as they all do. I keep thinking, I just want to write something short, and they just keep getting longer. It's just like, oh no.
That's always a good sign. That's always a good sign.
Yeah, I guess so. If people really like to read that much, I keep hearing that people like to read less and less. So I don't know why what I'm writing is getting longer and longer.
It's your own
But
form of therapy.
yeah, either way. Yeah, and there's other projects on there too. Niccolo did listen to a mixtape I made of film
Big slave,
scores.
yes.
Yes, and that was a lot of fun to put together. So you can check that out. And then there's also a link to the one I made back in 2018, which it does have the Virgin Suicides in there. It doesn't have their score, the film score, but it does have a slowed down voiceover from Giovanni Ribisi, or someone that used to make my cat uncomfortable back when he was alive. When I'd play the CD of the score for this film, be like, what is that? But he eventually got used to it. But if you want to hear that deep cut, it is on that mixtape.
Yeah, no, all those links are in the show notes below. You can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky at NikiGrant97. My work is on YouTube and Vimeo at Enjoy the Movies. If you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, follow us, send us a like, and stay tuned, because in 2 weeks' time we will be back for the first time ever, joined by the good Jackie Sharp. People who are familiar with the Clapper podcast universe have definitely heard this voice before, because we're talking about Cloud Atlas, so stay tuned for that. We hope you have a lovely, lovely day, and we will see you soon. Goodbye.